The crossroads lay quiet beneath a pewter sky, the ancient oaks on all four corners lashing in the rising wind. Eleanor Wainwright had walked this lane 100 times, her basket heavy with dried lavender and tinctures for the ailing cottagers on the far side of Thornwood. She was the daughter of a physician who had lost everything but his books, and she had learned early that a woman's usefulness was her only currency. She paused where the rutted track met the main coaching road. The air carried a wrongness, a vibration through the soles of her half-boots before the sound reached her. Thunder, but not from the sky, hoofbeats wild and ungoverned. Then the splintering crack of a driver's whip, a scream that was not human. Around the bend, a black and gilt coach burst into view, four matched grays in full panic, their eyes rolling white. The driver's seat was empty, the reins whipping like serpents against the horse's flanks. One wheel bounced over a stone, and the coach tilted dangerously. Eleanor dropped her basket. She did not think. She ran toward the runaway, not away, an action so profoundly reckless that the old woodsman emerging from the copse shouted a warning she never heard. She had grown up around horses, knew the language of fear in them. The lead horse, a massive dapple gray, was the key. If she could not calm him, they would all die in the ravine beyond the bridge. She planted herself directly in their path, arms wide, and let out a low, steady whistle, the same note her father had used on the hunting stallions when they shied. The grays, lathered and frenzied, checked their stride a fraction. She sang a nonsense lullaby, voice trembling but clear, and stepped sideways, never breaking eye contact with the lead horse. Her fingers found the cheek strap of the nearest animal, and she swung herself up onto the pole between the wheelers, her skirts tangling dangerously to grasp the loose reins. It took all her strength to haul them in. Muscle by muscle, hoofbeat by hoofbeat, the horses slowed. The coach shuddered to a halt 50 yards from the bridge. The wind died. The only sound was her own ragged breathing and the snorting, steaming horses. A groom appeared from the direction of the post town, hollering, but Eleanor's attention went to the coach door that swung open with a groan. Inside, a man lay slumped against the squabs, blood sheeting from a gash on his temple where his head had struck the window frame. His clothes were dark, beautifully cut, but what pinned her to the spot was the unnatural stillness of him. "Help me," she said to the panting groom who had finally reached her. "He's hurt." They lifted the man from the carriage and laid him on the grass. Eleanor tore a strip from her petticoat and pressed it to the wound. His face was all hard angles, a jaw that spoke of authority even in unconsciousness, dark brows drawn together as if wrestling some private demon. His linen was fine as gossamer. A gentleman, then, possibly titled, his eyes opened. Eleanor forgot the wind, the blood on her hands, the groom's frantic prayers. Those eyes were gray as a winter sea, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made the air leave her lungs. He tried to speak, but the sound was a gravel whisper, and his hand caught her wrist with surprising strength. "Not let them know," he breathed. "The coach, it was not an accident." Then his eyes rolled back, and he went limp. Eleanor stared down at him, the weight of his warning pressing into her chest. The groom, who had been inspecting the broken traces, suddenly let out a strangled sound. "Miss." The crest on the door. "It's the Duke of Ashworth." She looked at the elegant gold monogram, her heart sinking into a place she had kept carefully guarded. She had saved a duke, and a duke who believed someone had tried to kill him. The crossroads now felt less like a meeting place and more like the opening move in a game she did not understand. The first drops of rain struck her cheek as the duke's man, a wild-eyed valet who had been thrown from the box, stumbled toward them through the hedge. Eleanor made a decision. "We cannot move him far. My father's cottage is just through the woods. Carry him there and tell no one who he is." She did not know it yet, but she had already placed herself between the most powerful man in the county and whatever darkness hunted him. And the Duke of Ashworth, even in unconsciousness, had not released her wrist. The cottage smelled of dried rosemary and old books, a refuge perched at the edge of woodland. Eleanor's father, a man whose hands had once performed surgeries in London but now trembled with age, cleaned and stitched the Duke's head wound with steady competence. Eleanor stood by the fire, watching the unconscious man's chest rise and fall, her wrist still aching where his fingers had held her. "Concussion, certainly," her father murmured, washing blood from his instruments. He may not remember anything clearly for days. The body protects itself. Eleanor said nothing about the whispered warning. Instead, she retrieved the Duke's coat, a garment of such exquisite tailoring it felt like an intrusion to touch. Inside the breast pocket, a letter unsealed. The address was a name, Sterling, nothing more, no title. The contents were a single line: "I have found the proof. Meet me at the Abbey ruins at moonrise." A chill crept up her neck. She returned the letter, placed the coat aside, and pulled a blanket over the sleeping man. For 3 days he drifted in and out of fever, and for 3 days Eleanor sat vigil. When his nightmares came, and they came often, she spoke to him of ordinary things, of the blackbird that nested in the hawthorn, of the way the river ran after rain. She did not ask his name. She did not want it. On the 4th morning, she woke from a doze in the armchair to find him sitting upright, watching her. The gray eyes were lucid now, and in them there was a guarded curiosity that sent a flush up her throat. "You are the one who stood in the road," he said, his voice low and hoarse but recovering. "I am a fool's errand. Yet you are alive to criticize it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first she had seen. He looked around the cramped cottage, at the patched curtains and the worn rug, and some calculation shifted behind his expression. "I will reward you handsomely for your bravery. Anything you ask within reason." Eleanor shook her head. "I require nothing but your recovery." "I did not do it for payment." He studied her, and the silence stretched taut. She felt suddenly exposed, as if he could see the carefully pressed seams of her gown and the hours of mending it hid. "Then you are either very foolish," he said slowly, "or you have no idea who I am." "I know you are a duke," she replied evenly. "I also know a man's life is worth more than his title." Leaned back against the pillows, the movement causing a wince. "In my experience, the two are rarely separated." He paused. "I will not insult you by offering coin, but I am in your debt, Miss Wainwright, Eleanor Wainwright. He tested the name as if it were a curious vintage. "I ask only that you keep my presence here a secret. I must return to my household, but not yet. There are matters I must attend to first." Eleanor thought of the letter in his coat, the Abbey ruins. She could warn him, but something held her back. A premonition that to reveal what she had seen would tether her to this man in ways she could not afford. Instead, she simply nodded. He left at dusk 2 days later, dressed in plain clothes borrowed from her father, a hired postchaise waiting on the lane. Before he climbed in, he turned back. The last of the light caught his face, making him look less like a duke and more like a man carrying a great weight. "This is not goodbye, Eleanor Wainwright," he said quietly. "You have my word." Carriage disappeared into the twilight, and Eleanor stood at the crossroads again, her heart beating too fast. She did not know if his promise was a blessing or a curse. But as she returned to the empty cottage, she found on the table a single silver locket, inside a miniature of a woman with kind eyes and the inscription "Ashworth Hall always." He had left it intentionally, a thread connecting her to his world. She closed her fist around it, and for the first time in years she felt the dangerous stirring of hope. Autumn arrived with a riot of copper leaves and a summons that turned Eleanor's quiet life inside out. The steward of Ashworth Hall, a grim-lipped man named Hargreave, appeared at the cottage with a document. Her father's debts Eleanor had spent years pretending did not exist, had been purchased by the ducal estate. The amount was ruinous. The terms, however, were peculiar. In lieu of payment, Miss Wainwright was to present herself at the hall for a period of service, the nature of which was unspecified. Her father wept. Eleanor felt the walls of her carefully constructed independence crumbling. The locket, hidden in her pocket, seemed to burn. She said nothing of the Duke's possible hand in this. Perhaps he had forgotten her. Perhaps this was simply the way of the powerful, a reminder that no kindness went uncollected. She arrived at Ashworth Hall on a gray morning, her single trunk hoisted by a footman who looked through her as if she were furniture. The house was a masterpiece of sandstone and glass, set in a valley of sculpted gardens that flowed into wild parkland. Eleanor was led not to the servants' entrance but to a morning room hung with silk, where a woman of about 60 waited, erect as a general. "I am Lady Cressingham, His Grace's aunt," the woman announced without warmth. "You are the girl who stopped the runaway coach. My nephew, in his inscrutable wisdom, believes you possess a steady nerve suitable for organizing the family archives. You will live here, work here, and conduct yourself with the utmost discretion. The Duke is not to be disturbed." Eleanor curtsied, her mind racing. So he remembered, and he had chosen to bring her into his household, but at a careful distance. The sting of it was sharper than she expected. The archives proved to be a cavernous, neglected library on the third floor, filled with centuries of ledgers, correspondence, and legal documents. It was here, on her third day, that she found the first thread of a darker tapestry. Buried in a trunk marked "Personal Effects of the Late Duke," she discovered a series of letters between the previous Duke and a solicitor, concerning a contested inheritance. The name Sterling appeared again and again, connected to a claim on the Ashworth title itself. Eleanor's hands began to tremble. She recalled the letter in the Duke's coat. Someone named Sterling was not merely a rival but a threat to his entire legacy. She did not hear the door open. She did not know she was no longer alone until his voice came from behind her, freezing the blood in her veins. "You read with a determination that would alarm my steward." She spun. He stood just inside the doorway, dressed in riding clothes, mud-spattered boots, and an expression that held neither welcome nor hostility, only a meticulous observation. He looked thinner than before, and the scar on his temple was a silvered line, but his presence filled the room like a storm front. "Your Grace." She curtsied, dropping the letters. "Forgive me. I did not intend to pry." He stepped closer, lifting one of the letters. His eyes scanned it, and something dark flickered there. "You have found a wound I have spent months trying to close. Did you also read the letter you discovered in my coat pocket?" She went still. "You knew I had seen it. I woke several times during that fever. I heard you move about, heard the rustle of paper. I gave you the locket because I needed to see what you would do with knowledge. You did nothing." He set the letter down. "That is why you are here, Miss Wainwright, not for debt, for truth. I need someone I can trust who exists outside the machinations of my family, and I believe against all reason that someone might be you." Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. He had orchestrated everything, the debt, the summons, not as cruelty but as a gambit. He was asking her to step into a conspiracy that could destroy a dukedom. "What is Sterling?" she whispered. "My cousin," the Duke said quietly. "The man who arranged for my coach to lose its driver on a dangerous road. The man who now plans to claim my title by proving I am illegitimate." In that dusty library, with the autumn light slanting through the high windows and their eyes locked, Eleanor understood that her life had become irrevocably entwined with his. The weeks that followed unfolded like a carefully plotted dance. Eleanor remained ostensibly the archivist, but her true role was that of an investigator. The Duke, whose name, she learned, was Alexander Montclair, visited her in the library almost daily under the guise of inspecting family papers. Together they untangled the knot of the past. The previous Duke had married twice. His first wife, Alexander's mother, had died in childbirth in a remote Scottish cottage, attended only by a midwife who later vanished. The second wife, a coldly ambitious woman, was mother to the cousin, Phineas Sterling. The crux of the claim was a document implying that the first marriage had been invalid, a forgery, Alexander believed, but one so expertly crafted that even the House of Lords might accept it. Eleanor's task was to locate the missing midwife's records. The search took her into the village, into parish registries, into whispered conversations with old servants, and everywhere she went, she felt watched. A figure in a dark cloak, a man loitering near the cottage where her father now lived alone. Fear became a constant companion. One evening, as a storm lashed the hall, Alexander found her in the library, slumped over a stack of faded registers. He carried a lamp and a tray of food, an act so unducal that she stared. "You have not eaten," he said. "It was not a question. I am close. There is a record of a midwife named Mrs. Bannock who delivered a child at Loch Arkaig in 1797, the same year you were born, but the page has been torn out." Set the tray down and knelt beside her, scanning the mutilated volume. His shoulder brushed hers, and she caught the scent of rain and sandalwood. The proximity made her pulse stutter. "Then someone is ahead of us. Sterling is already at the hall," she said quietly. "I saw him arrive this afternoon. He claimed kinship and your aunt welcomed him. Alexander's expression turned to granite. He stood, moving toward the door, but Eleanor caught his sleeve. You cannot confront him without proof. He will only accelerate his claim. Then what would you have me do? Wait while he poisons my household against me. Let me go to Scotland. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. I will find Mrs. Bannock. I will bring back the truth. Turned, and the raw emotion in his eyes made her breath catch. No, it is too dangerous. You have already risked too much for a man who has given you nothing but confinement and intrigue. You gave me purpose, she said. You saw me when the world had rendered me invisible. Let me do this. Storm raged beyond the glass, and in the flickering lamplight he lifted his hand and with impossible gentleness touched her cheek. Eleanor, if anything happened to you, the words hung unfinished, their implication a third presence in the room. She covered his hand with her own. Nothing will. I am the woman who stopped a runaway coach, remember. A sound at the door severed the moment. They both turned. Phineas Sterling stood there, a slim, handsome man with a viper's smile, rainwater dripping from his greatcoat. Cousin Alexander, he drawled. And the little archivist, how touching. Do forgive the interruption. I came to borrow a book, but it seems I have found something far more interesting. The air thickened with venomous promise. Eleanor's heart pounded as Phineas's gaze crawled over her. The hidden war had just become an open one. Phineas Sterling did not waste his advantage. The next morning, Lady Cressingham summoned Eleanor to the drawing-room with glacial formality. The Duke's aunt sat beneath a portrait of her late brother, her face a mask of aristocratic outrage. Miss Wainwright, your presence here is no longer required. It has come to my attention that you have been engaged in conduct unbecoming your station. You will pack your things and leave within the hour. Eleanor stood perfectly still. Might I know the nature of the accusation? You have been observed in compromising proximity with His Grace. A servant's gossip would be damaging enough, but you have attracted the notice of Mr. Sterling, who is a guest in this house. I will not have my family's reputation dragged through the mud by an adventuress who presumes above her birth. I am no adventuress. Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her hands shook. I have done nothing dishonorable. Lady Cressingham's eyes narrowed. You have done the unforgivable. You have made the Duke care. I have watched him for years, and I have never seen him look at any woman the way he looked at you in that library. Sterling will use it. Already he whispers that the Duke is entangled with a low-born schemer, that his judgment is compromised. Do you not see? You are a liability. Eleanor swallowed the bitter truth. She was being dismissed not because she had acted improperly, but because her very existence threatened Alexander's position. Without another word, she curtsied and left the room. She was packing her trunk in the attic when Alexander appeared. He shut the door behind him, his face hollow with fury. I have just learned. She had no right. She had every right. This is her world, not mine. Sterling will destroy you if I stay. Then let him. He crossed the room in 3 strides and took her hands. Eleanor, I have spent my life surrounded by people who wanted my title, my wealth, my influence. No one has ever simply wanted me. You saved my life before you knew my name. You have fought for my honor without asking for anything. If that is not a foundation for more than duty, I do not know what is. Burned her eyes. Alexander, a commotion downstairs cut through the moment. Raised voices, the clatter of hooves. Alexander opened the door to find his valet white-faced. Your Grace, the magistrate is here. Mr. Sterling has sworn an affidavit that you are not the true Duke and that you have conspired to conceal the truth. He demands you surrender the estate. The blow had come sooner than expected. Alexander turned to Eleanor, and in his eyes she saw not defeat but a fierce, unyielding determination. Go out the back stairs. Take the carriage waiting by the east gate. My man will drive you to the coaching inn. I will join you when this is settled. I will not leave you. You must. You are my only chance to prove the truth. Find Mrs. Bannock. Find the record. I will hold Sterling at bay. He pressed a leather purse into her palm and a sealed letter. This will grant you access to the family's Scottish agent. Go now. Trust no one. Kissed her then, hard, desperate, a collision of fear and promise. Then he was gone, his footsteps ringing on the stairs, and Eleanor was alone with the weight of a dukedom on her shoulders. She fled through the servants' corridors, heart thundering, and did not look back. The journey to the Highlands was a blur of rain-lashed roads and sleepless nights. Eleanor traveled as a governess returning to family, the ring on her left hand, a simple silver band that had belonged to her mother, serving as a shield against unwelcome questions. The letter from Alexander commanded instant deference from his Scottish agent, a laconic man named Munro who supplied her with a map and a sturdy pony. The midwife, Mrs. Bannock, lived in a crofter's hut on the shores of a black loch, surrounded by mountains that clawed at the sky. She was ancient, her back bent like a hawthorn branch, but her eyes were sharp as flint. "I have waited 30 years for someone to come," the old woman said, gesturing Eleanor to a stool by the peat fire. "I knew the first Duke's dying wish was that the truth be told, but fear is a powerful silencer." "What truth, Mrs.?" Bannock reached into a chest and withdrew a tin box. Inside lay a certificate of marriage, signed and witnessed, and a letter in a woman's frail hand. The Duke's first wife, his true love, married him before God and the law in this very glen. I stood as witness. The child, Alexander, was born legitimate. The second marriage was bigamy. The current Duke is the rightful heir, and Phineas Sterling has no claim at all. Eleanor's hands shook as she read the documents. The proof was irrefutable. "Why did you never come forward?" "Because the second Duchess sent men to silence me. I have lived in hiding since the day I put my name to that paper, but I am old now and I will not carry this sin to my grave." She pushed the box into Eleanor's hands. "Take it, and may God go with you." Eleanor rode south as if the hounds of hell were at her heels. By the time she reached Ashworth Hall, she was exhausted, her gown torn, her hair wild. The great house blazed with light. Carriages lined the drive. Through the windows, she could see the silhouettes of a gathered assembly. She entered through the kitchens, ignored the protests of the staff, and burst into the great hall where a tribunal had been convened. A panel of magistrates and peers sat in judgment. Alexander stood alone before them, his bearing proud but his face etched with strain. Phineas Sterling lounged in a chair near the front, smiling. Every head turned as Eleanor strode forward, the tin box raised. "My lords," she called, her voice ringing. "I hold the proof of his Grace's legitimacy. The marriage of his mother to the late Duke of Ashworth was lawful, witnessed, and recorded. The second marriage was void. The man who calls himself Sterling is the pretender, and I have the documents to prove it." Gasps echoed like gunshots. Alexander's eyes met hers, and in that searing moment all the distance between them vanished. Sterling lunged to his feet, his composure shattered. "She lies. The woman is a servant, a known seductress. She is the woman who saved my life," Alexander cut in, his voice cleaving through the chaos. "And the woman I intend to marry if she will have me." Room fell into stunned silence. Eleanor felt her heart stop. Alexander walked toward her, ignoring the magistrates, his entire world narrowed to the space between them. He took the box from her hands, set it aside, and then, in front of every noble personage in the county, he went down on one knee. "Eleanor Wainwright, you have proven your courage, your loyalty, and your heart. I have no coronet to offer that compares to the honor of your love. Will you do me the singular privilege of becoming my Duchess?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, tears she had forbidden for years. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, 1,000 times." The magistrates examined the documents that night. Phineas Sterling fled before dawn, a warrant for fraud and attempted murder close behind. The conspiracy unraveled, thread by poisonous thread. And in the wreckage, a new and unshakable bond was forged. The wedding took place in the village church at the edge of winter, when the first snow dusted the gravestones and the holly berries gleamed like drops of blood against the frost. Eleanor walked down the aisle on her father's arm, wearing a gown of ivory velvet that Lady Cressingham, now thoroughly repentant and oddly devoted, had insisted upon providing. The church was filled not with sneering aristocrats but with the cottagers she had tended, the servants she had befriended, the people who had seen her worth long before the world took notice. Alexander waited at the altar, his face a canvas of barely contained emotion. The scar on his temple, once a mark of near tragedy, now seemed to her a badge of survival. He wore the Ashworth heirloom signet ring, his legitimacy restored and his enemies vanquished, but his gaze held only her. The bishop spoke the ancient words. Eleanor made her vows with a steady voice, and when Alexander slid the ring onto her finger, his own hands were not entirely steady. The congregation sighed as one when they kissed. The wedding breakfast at Ashworth Hall was a feast of light and music. Eleanor danced with Alexander under the great chandeliers, the same chandeliers that had once witnessed her humiliation, now glittering in celebration. "I made you a promise," he murmured against her temple. "At the crossroads, I told you it was not goodbye. I thought you had forgot. I remembered everything, every word, every kindness, every moment you sat by my bed and spoke of blackbirds and rivers." He drew back, his gray eyes tender. "You gave me back my life twice over. First from the coach, then from the conspiracy. I intend to spend the rest of my days ensuring you never regret it." That night, long after the guests had departed and the great house settled into quiet, Eleanor stood at the window of the ducal bedchamber looking out at the snow-blanketed park. Alexander came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. She leaned into him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I was so afraid," she confessed. "Not of Sterling, but of this, of being happy. I had convinced myself that love was a luxury beyond my reach. Now I believe it is the only thing worth fighting for." Turned her gently and kissed her with a reverence that brought fresh tears. Outside, the snow fell softly on the crossroads far beyond the gates, where a runaway coach had once careened toward destruction, and a woman with nothing had stood her ground. The road was silent now, but its story had been written into the very stones of Ashworth Hall. In the years that followed, the Duchess of Ashworth never forgot the taste of that first, desperate kiss in the attic. She transformed the estate into a haven for the poor, established a village infirmary, and presided over a household where kindness was the highest currency. And the Duke, who had once believed himself surrounded by enemies, found in his wife not just a partner but a sanctuary. They raised 3 children in the shadow of those ancient oaks, and every autumn when the leaves turned copper and the wind carried the scent of wood smoke, they would walk together to the crossroads. Alexander would press his lips to Eleanor's temple and whisper, "This is where my life began." She would smile, threading her arm through his, and reply, "Then we are in perfect agreement." The crossroads, once a place of peril, became a monument to a love that had been sealed not by titles or fortune, but by the courage of a woman who stopped a runaway coach and, in doing so, altered the course of destiny.